Some stories are never meant to be shared, not because they're shameful, but because they're sacred, because they live in the quiet, broken corners of our hearts, where we go to heal in silence, alone. But what happens when even that sacred space is violated? What happens when the person who broke you is the same one who secretly reads the pages where you finally started putting yourself back together? This isn't just a story about a journal. It's a story about betrayal, about family, about the things we bury just to survive, and the unbearable truth we face when those things are finally brought to light. This is the letter I never sent, to the woman who gave me life and then made me feel like I didn't deserve to live it. I never planned to tell this story, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it. So here it is.
I never expected to cry over a notebook. It was just a plain, leather-bound journal. No lock, no label, just something I picked up on a random day when I felt like my chest might collapse under the weight of everything I'd been holding in. I never meant for it to become sacred, but somehow it did. That journal became my second skin, a place where I could finally say all the things I was too afraid to speak out loud, things I didn't even know I was allowed to feel. It held the grief I never processed, the anger I never unleashed, the confusion I couldn't name. It was where I put the shattered parts of myself when I didn't know how to carry them anymore. And I trusted that it would be safe, not because the world is kind, but because I believed that at the very least, my own mother wouldn't invade it. But she did. And in that moment, something broke that may never fully repair. I remember the exact second I knew. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She was sitting across from me at the dinner table, doing that thing she always does, pretending to care while slipping in little daggers of judgment between bites of rice. But this time, her words were too specific. She repeated something I written, not said, not posted online, written, in that journal, in that exact phrasing. My stomach dropped, my hands cold. My brain tried to make excuses. Maybe I said that out loud once. Maybe it was a coincidence. But I knew. She had read it. And the worst part? She didn't look guilty. She looked smug, like she'd found a secret weapon to use against me, like my most private thoughts had become her new ammunition. I started journaling after my third therapy session. I wasn't ready to talk out loud. Not really. I was still in that fragile stage of healing, the one where you're half convinced your memories are wrong, that maybe you made it all up, that maybe you were just too sensitive. But the journal didn't judge me. It didn't interrupt or question or minimize. It just held space. Every night, I'd sit by my window, pen in hand, and let the words bleed out. Today, I remembered the time she told me I was too dramatic for crying when my pet died. I think that's when I learned to hide sadness. I still can't cry in front of people, not even my therapist. Is that normal? I never censored myself, not in those pages. It was the first time I allowed myself to tell the truth without sugarcoating it for someone else's comfort. I wrote about the manipulation, the guilt trips, the way she'd make me feel like I owed her everything, even my own silence. I wrote about the things that didn't seem big enough to count as abuse, but still haunted me years later. And I wrote with hope, too. Hope that I could get better, that I could become someone who didn't flinch at kindness, who didn't confuse love with control, who could one day breathe without checking the room for tension first. But all of that, every word, had been read by the one person I was trying to unlearn. At first, I tried to deny what had happened. I told myself maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe I left the journal out by mistake. Maybe she glanced at it accidentally. But the way she looked at me when she said those words, she wanted me to know. She wanted me to feel exposed, powerless, small. And it worked. I didn't say anything that night. I couldn't. My voice disappeared somewhere deep inside my throat, hiding behind the years of being told I was too sensitive, too emotional, too much. I just nodded and forced a smile, ate quietly, pretended I didn't notice the violation that had just happened. But inside, I was spiraling. Because that journal had become my only safe space. And now, it wasn't safe anymore. It felt like someone had ripped open my chest and read my heartbeat out loud. People always assume that if you grew up in a house with food on the table and clothes on your back, you were fine. They don't ask about the tone. They don't ask about the silence after you cried. They don't ask what it felt like to walk on eggshells in your own home. My mother didn't hit me. She didn't scream. She didn't lock me in rooms or threaten to throw me out. Instead, she used quieter weapons. Guilt, shame, control, dismissal. She'd twist words until I questioned my own memory. She'd withhold affection if I upset her. She'd tell me I was being too emotional when I tried to express how I felt. And worst of all, she made sure that to the outside world, she looked like the perfect mother, which made it impossible for me to explain why I felt so broken. That's what emotional abuse does. It hides behind politeness, behind birthday cakes and back-to-school shopping. It teaches you that your pain isn't valid unless someone can see the bruises. So I stopped talking, and I started writing. The first thing I did after realizing she'd read the journal was lock it in a drawer. It felt symbolic, like slamming the door on something sacred. But that didn't undo the fact that she had already seen it, already read what was meant for me, already twisted it in her mind to fit her version of the story. Later that week, I asked her, carefully, if she had ever seen my journal. She didn't hesitate. No, why would I read that? I could tell she was lying. She didn't even blink. But she added something else, something that hit me harder than the denial. She said, if you don't want people to know your secrets, maybe don't write them down. That's when I knew she didn't feel bad. She felt justified. To her, it wasn't a betrayal. It was her right. Because in her world, boundaries don't exist. Because in her world, I don't get to have privacy or pain or a voice unless she approves of it. I wish I could say I confronted her, that I screamed, that I stood up for myself. But I didn't. Not yet. Because the little girl inside of me was still waiting for her to be the mother I needed. Still hoping that maybe just once she'd say, I'm sorry. Instead, she reminded me, in her own quiet way, that my feelings were not welcome. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something. She wasn't going to change. So maybe I had to. I kept writing after that, but I started a new journal, one with a lock this time, one that I keep hidden, one that lives with me, not in her house, not in her reach. And as I write, I'm learning how to speak, not to her, but to myself, to the part of me that's still healing, to the girl who once thought survival meant staying silent. Because the truth is, silence only ever protected her, never me. And I'm done protecting the person who broke me.
I used to think betrayal was loud, that it came with screaming, broken plates, slammed doors, that you could see it coming, like a storm rolling over the horizon. But the kind of betrayal my mother gave me was quiet. It slid into my life the way a draft slips through a crack in the window, unnoticed at first, until one day you realize the room has gone cold. And it wasn't just that she read my journal. It was that she acted like it was nothing, like she had every right, like my pain was a thing to pry open and examine without my permission. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about her began to tilt. I remember sitting in my car after that dinner, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers hurt. The parking lot lights blurred in my eyes. I wasn't even sure if I was crying. I just knew my body felt electric, like a live wire, like all my nerves had been stripped bare. I kept hearing her voice. If you don't want people to know your secrets, maybe don't write them down. I had told myself for years that she didn't mean to hurt me, that maybe she was just clumsy with love, that maybe she was doing her best and I was the one who couldn't handle it. But in that moment, the curtain dropped. I saw her clearly, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel before. Anger. Not the soft, apologetic kind. The real thing. The kind that vibrates in your bones. The kind you're told as a child is dangerous. The kind you swallow down until it poisons you. I wanted to call my therapist right then. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive back, shove the journal in her hands and say, read it all out then. Read every word and tell me I'm making it up. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the dashboard, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Because that's what a lifetime of walking on eggshells does to you. It teaches you to freeze instead of fight. It teaches you that your own fury is something to be ashamed of. And that night, more than anything, I felt shame. The next morning, I woke up to a text from her. Good morning. Don't forget your cousin's birthday dinner tonight. Wear something nice. No mention of the night before, no acknowledgement of the tension, no apology. Just life as usual. And for a split second, I almost fell back into the pattern. I almost replied, sure, Mom, see you tonight. I almost pretended nothing had happened. But my fingers hovered over the screen. And then I put the phone down. I didn't answer. It felt like a small rebellion, but inside, it felt huge. Later that day, I opened the journal again, the one she'd read. The pages looked different now, like they belonged to someone else, like a crime scene. I ran my fingers over the ink and thought about how naive I had been to believe I could have a secret in that house. How I had wanted her so badly to be someone she wasn't. I thought about all the times she'd gone through my drawers when I was a teenager, all the times she'd accidentally overheard phone calls, all the times she'd used my words against me later, twisting them into something ugly. And I realized this wasn't new. It was a pattern. It had always been a pattern. I just hadn't wanted to see it. In therapy, they call it betrayal trauma. It's when the person you rely on for safety is the one hurting you. Your brain can't hold both truths at once, so it hides one. You tell yourself, they're not that bad. You make excuses. You normalize the pain. Until one day, something happens that makes the mask slip. For me, it was the journal. That was my mask slipping moment. I didn't go to the birthday dinner. I stayed home instead, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a new notebook in my lap. This one wasn't leather-bound. It wasn't beautiful. It was just a cheap spiral notebook from the dollar store. But when I opened it, it felt like breathing. It felt like starting over. I wrote, I don't know if I can forgive her. I wrote, I'm scared of my own mother. I wrote, I'm angry. I wrote,
I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. And for the first time in a long time, my hand didn't shake. In that new notebook, I didn't just write about what she did. I wrote about how it made me feel. The humiliation of realizing she'd read my most private pain. The confusion of still loving her even when she hurt me. The exhaustion of trying to heal in a house where wounds are denied. And as I wrote, something shifted. The words started to sound less like a plea for her to see me and more like a message to myself. I believe you. You're not crazy. This happened. It was like my own voice reaching out from the page, steady and quiet, saying, "You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to draw a line. You're allowed to want a life where you're safe." I don't know if my mother even realizes what she did that night. I don't know if she'd care if she did. But I know this. Something inside me woke up. Something I had buried under years of survival. It's still small, still tentative, but it's there. The part of me that knows I deserve better. And that part is writing these words now.
I grew up in a house that was clean, quiet, and polite. A house where people said thank you and excuse me, where the furniture was always in the right place, the curtains always drawn just enough to let in light, but never too much. A house that looked, from the outside, like the picture of stability. But inside, it was something else entirely. It wasn't chaotic or violent. It was worse in a way, because it was cold, controlled, silent. We weren't allowed to be messy, not with our rooms and definitely not with our emotions. Crying was weakness. Anger was disrespect. Sadness was something you dealt with privately and preferably not at all. I learned very young that my feelings made her uncomfortable. And when something made her uncomfortable, it became a problem I was expected to fix. I remember once, when I was about 7, I came home from school crying. A friend had said something cruel to me. I don't even remember what it was now, but I do remember what happened next. I walked into the kitchen, eyes red, voice shaking, and she looked up from the sink and said, "Don't bring that energy in here." Just like that. No hug, no "what's wrong, sweetheart?" No comfort, just rejection. And so I swallowed it, right there, wiped my face, went to my room, and learned the first rule of survival in that house. Hide your feelings if you want to be loved. She wasn't cruel in the way people expect cruel to look. She didn't yell, she didn't call me names, she didn't hit me. But she didn't see me either. She saw what she wanted me to be. Well-behaved, grateful, low maintenance, smiling, presentable, quiet. If I strayed too far from that image, she'd reel me back in with guilt or silence or a sigh that said more than any words ever could. She had a way of making me feel like a burden, simply for existing in a way she didn't approve of. By the time I was 12, I had already become a master of emotional shape-shifting. If she was in a good mood, I'd match it. If she was cold, I'd retreat. If she was upset, I'd fix it, even when it wasn't my fault. I became the peacekeeper, the good child, the one who never asked for too much, never complained, never cried too loud. And the worst part? She praised me for it. She'd brag to her friends, "She's so mature for her age. She's not like those other kids. She doesn't throw tantrums. She's always so calm." But I wasn't calm. I was numb. There's a difference. My father was there, but he wasn't present. He worked long hours, came home late, a man of few words and even fewer emotions. And when he was around, he let her lead.
He'd sit at the table silent while she corrected me for talking back when I was just trying to explain myself. He'd leave the room when she gave me the cold shoulder for something as simple as forgetting to say thank you the way she liked it. And so I learned the second rule of that house. Don't expect anyone to protect you. By the time I was a teenager, I had developed all the symptoms of someone who was fine on the outside and completely unraveling on the inside. High grades, polite smile, always helpful. But inside, I was anxious, overthinking every word I said, terrified of disappointing her, terrified of being a disappointment. Because love in our house was conditional. It was earned through obedience and easily withdrawn. If I failed a test, she'd go quiet for days. If I questioned her decisions, she'd say, "You always have to be difficult." If I cried, she'd say, "Are you going to be dramatic again?" So I stopped showing anything real. I became exactly what she wanted. A daughter who edited herself to fit her mother's comfort zone. Looking back, it's no surprise I ended up in therapy. Not because of any one thing, but because of the accumulation of all the tiny, invisible injuries, the moments that didn't seem like much at the time but left permanent marks. The time she read my diary in middle school and laughed about it to my aunt. The time she said I looked too chubby in a dress I loved. The way she always compared me to other girls, softer girls, quieter girls, girls who didn't challenge her. And the way she always made me feel like my pain was something I should apologize for. I've heard people say, she did the best she could. And maybe that's true. Maybe she was also raised in a house where emotions were dangerous, where love was performance, where silence was survival. But knowing that doesn't erase the hurt. It doesn't make it okay. Because even if she didn't mean to break me, she still did. And now I'm the one left picking up the pieces, learning slowly that love doesn't have to feel like fear. That comfort doesn't have to come with conditions, that I don't have to earn softness. I am learning that I am allowed to feel, that my emotions aren't dangerous, that I can be angry, sad, scared, joyful, all of it, and still be worthy, still be loved, still be enough. Growing up in that house, I was taught to shrink, to apologize for my existence, to believe that silence meant peace. But now, I know better. Silence is not peace, it's just absence. It's the space where connection should have lived, and I refuse to carry that silence forward. Not in my relationships, not in my healing, and not in my story.
There's something different about writing words down instead of speaking them. When you speak, you brace for a reaction. You watch someone's face. You edit mid-sentence. You soften the blow, pull back the truth, because you're afraid of how it will land. But when you write, it's just you. No eyes watching, no judgment hovering in the air. Just the pen, the page, and everything you've been too scared to say. That's what the journal was for me. It wasn't just paper, it was permission. Permission to be honest, to stop pretending, to feel everything. Because there were so many things I never got to say out loud. So many thoughts I swallowed because I knew they'd be misunderstood, twisted, or used against me. But on those pages, I let them live. I wrote things like, I don't think she ever really loved me for who I am, only for how well I played the role she cast me in. Or, sometimes I feel like I was born just to make her feel better about herself. And
There are days I fantasize about what it would be like to have a mother who actually wanted to know me. It felt wrong at first, cruel even, to write those things, because I was trained to protect her feelings, even at the cost of my own. Because I was raised to believe that speaking truth about your parents was a form of betrayal. But I kept writing, because the alternative was staying quiet forever, and silence was slowly killing me. There were other things too, more vulnerable things. Like the time I had a panic attack at school and didn't tell anyone because I was afraid she'd say I was being dramatic. Or how I used to make myself invisible in public because I knew if I stood out, she'd find something to criticize. Or how every compliment she gave me felt like a trap, something she'd take back the moment I disappointed her. I wrote about how she told me I was too much, too intense, too emotional, too talkative, too sensitive. And I believed her. I believed I needed to be less in order to be loved. So I dimmed myself, dulled the edges, shrunk my voice, until I could barely recognize who I was anymore. And then I wrote about the quiet resentment that built up over the years, the anger I wasn't allowed to show. Like the time she made fun of my anxiety in front of guests, or when she told me I should be grateful she wasn't as bad as other mothers. As if the absence of cruelty was the same as kindness, as if not being abusive was some kind of trophy. I wrote, why does she get to decide what pain counts and what doesn't? Why does she act like my hurt is an attack on her character? Why do I still want her to love me, even now? That one hurt the most, because for all the damage, all the manipulation, all the silence, there was still a part of me, small but stubborn, that longed for her approval, that still wanted her to hold me and say, I see you. I'm sorry I didn't before. But she never did. And that's why I kept writing, to grieve the mother I never had, to make sense of the confusion, the sadness, the rage. Each entry became a kind of mirror, not the kind that reflects what others see, but the kind that shows you what you've been hiding from yourself. And what I saw wasn't weak or broken. It was a version of me that had survived, that had adapted, that had made it through a childhood where emotions were threats and truth was unwelcome. I didn't write for revenge. I didn't write to blame. I wrote to heal, to hold space for myself, to say this happened and it matters. Because for so long, I thought my pain didn't count unless someone else validated it, unless she admitted it, unless someone else said, yes, that was wrong. But now I know better. My pain doesn't need a witness to be real. It doesn't need a courtroom or a confession. It just needs a voice. And that's what the journal gave me. When she read it, she didn't just invade my privacy. She stepped into a sacred space and mocked the prayers she found there. Because to me, those words were sacred. Not pretty, not polished, but true. They were the words I had never dared to say out loud, because I knew, deep down, that saying them would make everything real. That I couldn't go back to pretending after that. That I couldn't shrink myself anymore. That I'd have to face the truth. She hurt me, and she doesn't think she did anything wrong. It's terrifying to write something you know could shatter the illusion. To admit, even to yourself, that the person you've been trying to please your whole life may never give you what you need. Love, respect, safety, accountability. She may never say sorry. She may never understand. She may never change. And that has to be okay. Because healing can't depend on her. It can only begin with me. The things I could never say out loud, I'm saying them now. Not with anger, but with truth. Not for revenge, but for release. Because silence didn't protect me. It just buried me. And I'm done being buried.
It took me 3 days to bring it up. 3 days of pacing, rehearsing, doubting myself. 3 days of hearing her voice in my head, the one that always said, "You're being dramatic. You misunderstood. You're overreacting again." But I couldn't pretend this time. I couldn't let it slide. So I called her, not to accuse, just to ask, to give her the chance to be honest, to explain, to maybe apologize. She didn't. "I would never read your journal," she said, voice calm, clipped, defensive. "That's not who I am." Then, without skipping a beat, she added, "Besides, if you didn't want anyone to see it, maybe you shouldn't leave it lying around." And just like that, the air went still. Because there it was, the quiet confession, hidden inside a denial. She did read it. She just didn't think it was wrong. Or worse, she knew it was wrong. She just thought I deserved it. She didn't ask how it made me feel. She didn't acknowledge the betrayal. She didn't say, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that." Instead, she talked in circles. She called it curiosity. She called it concern. She said, "I just wanted to understand you better. You never talked to me." And there it was again, the deflection, the blame, the way she twisted it back to me. It was my fault for not opening up, my fault for writing things down, my fault for making her feel like a bad mother. That's what cut the deepest. Not the invasion, not even the lies, but the way she took my pain, the pain she caused, and made herself the victim. She said, "I've done everything for you." She said, "I'm sorry if I hurt you, but you don't understand how hard it's been for me too." She said, "You're always so quick to point fingers. Why don't you ever see what I've gone through?" And in that moment, I realized she wasn't sorry. She wasn't even listening. She was defending her image, not repairing the relationship. I hung up the phone feeling hollow. Not because I expected a different outcome, but because a part of me still hoped for one. I hoped she'd finally say what I've needed to hear since I was a child. "I'm sorry, that was wrong. You didn't deserve that." But she didn't. She wouldn't. Maybe she couldn't. And that hurt in a way I can't fully explain. Because this wasn't just about a journal. This was about a lifetime of unspoken truths being dismissed all over again. This was watching the door of empathy slam shut right in my face. For days, I kept replaying her words, trying to understand how she could so easily flip the script, how she could read my private thoughts and come away feeling like she was the one who'd been wronged. And then it hit me. This is what she's always done. Every time I tried to express my feelings, she'd reframe it as an attack. Every time I cried, she made it about how much pressure she was under. Every time I voiced my hurt, she turned it into a conversation about how hard it is to be a mother. So eventually, I stopped trying. Because you can only speak into a void for so long before you go silent. This time, though, I didn't go silent. I wrote. I wrote about how her excuses felt like knives, about how she dressed her guilt in self-pity and called it love, about how every time she refused to own what she did, she deepened the wound. I wrote, "You don't get to decide if I hurt you. You don't get to read my pain
and then claim you know me. I wrote, I am not your mirror. I don't exist to reflect back the version of you that makes you feel good. I wrote, I needed a mother, not a publicist. I started realizing how often she used excuses as shields, soft words that protected her ego, but never changed her behavior. She'd say, I was sorry you feel that way, but never, I'm sorry for what I did. She'd say, I didn't mean it like that, but never, I'll try to do better next time. It was always about intent, never about impact. But here's the truth. You can love someone and still hurt them. You can mean well and still cause damage. And if you're more invested in proving you didn't mean to hurt someone than repairing the hurt, then you're not really sorry. I used to think I was overreacting, that maybe I was too sensitive, too emotional, too quick to call something harmful. But now I see that was just the story I told myself to survive being invalidated again and again. Because if I blamed myself, then at least the world made sense. At least she didn't betray me, I just misunderstood. But that lie doesn't protect me anymore. Now I see clearly. She read my journal. She crossed a line. She saw the pain I carry, and she chose to defend herself instead of showing up for me. That's not love. That's control. People always ask, have you talked to her about it again? And I want to say yes. I want to say I sat her down, looked her in the eye, and told her everything. But the truth is, I haven't. Because there's no point in handing your heart to someone who's already proven they'll dissect it for their own comfort. There's no point in writing a letter if the person it's meant for refuses to read it with empathy. So I write these words for me, to let go, to make sense of what happened, to stop waiting for her to make it right. Because maybe that's the most painful part of healing, accepting that the apology you need may never come, and learning how to move forward anyway. She'll never admit it. She'll never say, yes, I read it. I'm sorry. That was wrong. And even if she did now, it might be too late. Because trust doesn't grow back overnight. It doesn't return just because someone finally says the right words. It returns when actions change, when patterns shift, when space is made for truth. And none of that has happened. So I carry the wound, but not in silence, not in shame, not as a secret. I carry it like a scar, evidence that I survived what I wasn't supposed to name. Her excuses no longer confuse me. They no longer gaslight me. They no longer define me. I see them now for what they are, a desperate attempt to protect the version of herself she wants to believe in. But I no longer have to protect that version for her. That's not my job. My job is to protect me.
There's a unique kind of heartbreak that comes when the person who hurt you paints themselves as the one who's been wronged. When you try to speak your truth and they twist it into an attack. When you say, this hurt me, and they respond with, I can't believe you would say that to me. When you bleed honesty and they call it betrayal. It's a quiet erasure, not just of your pain, but of your reality. And it leaves you wondering, how do you heal when the villain in your story is convinced she's the hero? I used to think healing was about forgiveness. That if I could just understand her better, her trauma, her upbringing, her insecurities, I could soften the sting. That if I could step into her shoes, I could rewrite the story into something more bearable. But here's what I've learned.
understanding someone does not excuse their harm, and empathy is not a hall pass for cruelty. She may have had a hard life. She may have never learned how to regulate her emotions or speak gently or love unconditionally. But that doesn't make her actions okay. It doesn't undo the confusion, the guilt, the emotional fractures that I'm still trying to glue back together. And it doesn't change the fact that every time I tried to name the pain, she made herself the victim. I remember once in my 20s, I brought up something that happened when I was a teenager, a moment that had haunted me for years. I didn't come at her with anger. I just said, hey, when you said this thing back then, it really stuck with me. I think it hurt more than I realized at the time. Her response? A deep sigh, then a cold voice. Do you know how hard it is to be a mother? You act like I was some kind of monster. No pause, no reflection, just instant defensiveness. And just like that, I was the bad guy. Again. She didn't see it as me reaching out, trying to heal. She saw it as an accusation, as an insult, as betrayal. Because to her, admitting fault is failure, and failure is weakness. She'd rather rewrite history than own even a moment of harm. She'd rather label me ungrateful than confront the possibility that she may have caused pain she didn't intend. And so she clings to her version of events. The one where she did her best, where I was too emotional, where any rift between us is my fault for holding a grudge. It's safer that way. For her, not for me. That's the thing about people who refuse accountability. They will always twist the narrative so they can sleep at night, even if it means you lose your peace in the process. And when that person is your mother, the damage runs deep. Because we grow up believing our parents are supposed to know better. We're wired to seek their approval, to protect them even at our own expense, to believe that if they hurt us, it must have been our fault. But it wasn't. The truth is, she doesn't think she's the villain. She thinks she's the one who sacrificed everything, the one who raised me alone, the one who worked so hard, the one who gave me everything. She holds on to that narrative like it's armor, because the idea that she might have hurt me is something she refuses to look at. So instead, she makes it about her feelings, her struggles, her disappointment that I don't see her as perfect. And I'm left standing there again, trying to explain how love without accountability isn't real love at all. I've stopped trying to get her to understand, not because I don't want her to, but because I've realized I can't heal in a conversation where I'm always cast as the villain just for being honest. I can't do the emotional labor of making her feel safe while simultaneously trying to recover from the wounds she caused. That's not healing. That's self-abandonment. And I've done enough of that in my life. These days, I've learned to tell myself the truth she refuses to say. Yes, she hurt me. Yes, it mattered. Yes, I have the right to feel it. Even if she never says sorry. Even if she never believes she did anything wrong. Because healing isn't about convincing the other person to change. It's about choosing not to gaslight yourself anymore. It's about letting go of the need to be understood by someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. It's about no longer making excuses for someone who wouldn't hesitate to make you the villain in their story. I don't need her apology to move forward. Would it be nice? Of course, but it's not required. What I need is permission, my own permission, to stop waiting for closure from a door she's never going to open, to stop shrinking myself so she doesn't feel guilty, to stop bleeding quietly so she doesn't have to feel bad. I don't owe her that anymore. I never did. Sometimes people say, but she's your mother. As if that title erases all harm, as if blood is a free pass for boundary violations, as if the role matters more than the relationship. But I've learned, painfully, that mother is not just a noun. It's a verb. It's something you do, not just something you are. And if you choose not to mother, with love, with listening, with softness, with accountability, then the title means nothing. I'm learning to mother myself now, to give myself the care I longed for, to sit with my emotions instead of silencing them, to say, I believe you when I feel dismissed, to say, you didn't deserve that when the past echoes too loudly. And some days, it's hard. Some days, the inner child in me still cries for her, still hopes she'll call and say, I read it all, I see you, I'm sorry. But I don't live in that hope anymore. I live in the truth. And the truth is this: she may never stop seeing herself as the villain. But that doesn't mean I have to keep living like I'm the villain.
I didn't walk into therapy looking for healing. I walked in because I was tired. Tired of feeling heavy. Tired of pretending I was fine. Tired of carrying around this invisible ache I couldn't name, only feel. I remember sitting on that couch during my first session, knees pressed together, hands in my lap like I was waiting to be graded. The therapist asked, "So, what brings you in today?" And I said, "I don't know. I just don't feel like myself." It was the closest I could get to the truth. Because how do you explain a lifetime of emotional bruises that never showed up on your skin? How do you describe the way you flinch at kindness, or hold your breath in quiet rooms, or feel guilty for crying when no one's watching? You don't. Not at first. Therapy didn't fix me overnight. It wasn't some magic cure. It was slow, uncomfortable, confronting. But it was also the first place I ever felt safe saying the words I'd swallowed for years. The first place where someone said, "That shouldn't have happened to you," without making excuses for the person who did it. And that changed everything. Week by week, I began to peel back the layers. I talked about the silence in my childhood home, the way my mother used guilt as a leash, the way I'd been trained to fear my own emotions, the way I'd been trained to prioritize her comfort over my truth. I cried. A lot. In a way I never had before. Not the controlled, careful kind of crying I did alone in my room, but the messy, gasping kind that leaves you raw and exhausted and finally lighter. And every time, my therapist didn't flinch. She didn't minimize. She didn't look away. She just held space. And in doing that, she taught me how to hold space for myself. One of the most powerful things she ever said to me was this: "You didn't deserve to be emotionally neglected just because your needs were inconvenient." That sentence cracked something open in me. Because for so long, I believed I was the problem. That if I'd just been easier, quieter, less emotional, maybe she would have loved me better. But that was never my burden to carry. Her inability to show up wasn't proof that I was too much. It was proof that she wasn't equipped to meet me where I was. And for the first time in my life, I started letting go of the shame. Therapy also helped me name things, like gaslighting, the subtle erasure of your reality by someone who wants to control the narrative, like parentification, when a child becomes responsible for managing a parent's emotions, like emotional enmeshment, when boundaries don't exist and love is conditional. These weren't just vague feelings anymore. They were patterns, and naming them gave me power. Because once something has a name, it loses its grip. It becomes a problem to work through, not a life sentence. One session, I brought in my journal, not the one my mother read, a new one. I read an entry out loud. My voice shook, my hands trembled, and my therapist just listened. No interruptions, no shock, no judgment. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "I'm proud of you for telling the truth. You're allowed to take up space here."
that sentence stayed with me. You're allowed to take up space. No one had ever said that to me before. Not like that. Not with sincerity, not in a way that made me believe it might actually be true. Over time, I started noticing changes. Not dramatic, cinematic ones, but small, quiet shifts. I stopped apologizing every time I cried. I stopped shrinking when I spoke. I stopped second-guessing every word I wrote. I began saying no, and not just to others, but to myself. No, I don't have to explain my pain to someone who refuses to listen. No, I don't owe my mother another chance if she's only going to hurt me again. No, I'm not too sensitive. I've just been made to believe that feelings are flaws. Those boundaries saved me. They still do. But therapy didn't just teach me how to grieve what I never had. It taught me how to rebuild from the inside out. It taught me that healing is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you were before the world taught you to doubt yourself. It's about remembering the version of you that laughed too loud, cried without shame, loved without fear, and welcoming them back home, one piece at a time. I still go, not because I'm broken, but because healing is a journey, not a destination. Some weeks I sit on that couch and say, I think I'm okay. Other weeks I fall apart again. Old wounds resurface, new layers unravel. And that's okay, because healing isn't linear. It's messy. It's human. And I no longer measure my worth by how together I seem. I measure it by how willing I am to keep showing up for myself, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. Therapy didn't erase the damage. It didn't fix my relationship with my mother. It didn't make the past disappear. But it gave me something more valuable. It gave me, the real me, the one who knows her feelings are valid, the one who speaks even when her voice shakes, the one who writes not to be heard, but to be free. And that's something no one, not even her, can take away from me again.
It came out of nowhere. One moment, I was standing by the sink, rinsing a glass. The next, I couldn't breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in. My heart was racing. Not fast, like when you're nervous, but erratically, like it was trying to escape my chest. My hands were shaking. My vision blurred. My body went ice cold. I remember grabbing the edge of the counter just to stay upright. And I remember her voice behind me saying, "What's wrong with you now?" Not concerned, not curious, just irritated, annoyed. Like my distress was an inconvenience. I didn't know it at the time, but that was my first panic attack. I had no words for it then. No framework to understand what was happening. I thought I was dying, literally. And the worst part wasn't the fear. It wasn't even the physical symptoms. It was the shame. The way her eyes narrowed, the way her tone turned sharp, clipped, cold, the way she didn't reach out, didn't ask if I needed help, didn't even pause what she was doing. She just said, "Stop being so dramatic," and then walked out of the room. I slid to the floor, back against the cabinet, and I remember pressing my palms to my chest, trying to slow my heartbeat, trying to be quiet, because if she heard me, she'd come back, and somehow that was more terrifying than the panic itself. I learned something that day. Not about anxiety, but about safety. I learned that even in my most vulnerable moments, I wasn't safe with her. Not physically unsafe, but emotionally unsafe. Invisible.
My fear didn't matter. My panic didn't warrant comfort. My pain didn't register as valid. And when the world started spinning inside me, I realized I was alone. I didn't tell anyone about that moment for years. Not friends, not partners, not even my therapist at first. Because I didn't think it counted. It wasn't bad enough. No one screamed. No one hit me. It was just a quiet moment on a kitchen floor. But it stayed with me, buried deep, surfacing in other ways. The way my chest tightens in small spaces. The way I over-explain myself when I feel misunderstood. The way I freeze when someone raises their voice, even slightly. The way I flinch when I start to cry, expecting ridicule before the first tear falls. It all began there, in her kitchen. It's strange how our bodies remember what our minds try to forget. For years, I thought I had control. I had built routines, habits, emotional armor. I had convinced myself that the past was behind me. But the body keeps score, and mine was holding on to that moment, that humiliation, that fear, that abandonment. The first time my nervous system learned, even in crisis, you must not be a burden. Even in fear, you must stay small. Later in therapy, when I finally told the story, I expected my therapist to brush it off the way I had, but she didn't. She leaned forward gently and said, "That was a trauma response." And I felt the breath catch in my throat because someone finally named it. Someone finally saw it. And in that moment, I realized I'd been carrying a wound I didn't even know I had. What happened in that kitchen wasn't just a panic attack. It was a turning point. The moment my body screamed what my voice was too afraid to say. I don't feel safe. Not in this house. Not in this relationship. Not in this silence. It was the moment my nervous system told the truth, long before I was ready to hear it. Since then, I've had more panic attacks, but now I recognize them. I understand the signals. I know how to ground myself, how to breathe through the storm, how to speak gently to the frightened child inside me. I have tools now, language, support, a therapist who reminds me that my body is not the enemy. It's just the messenger. But every time one starts, a part of me still flashes back to that kitchen, to the tile floor, the sharp lighting, her distant footsteps, and I have to remind myself I am not there anymore. I am not helpless. I am not invisible. Not anymore. There's something sacred about learning how to comfort yourself, about becoming the parent you never had, about whispering, "I'm here. I believe you. We're going to be okay," when your body is shaking and your heart is racing. It's not easy, but it's powerful, because healing isn't just about rewriting the story. It's about choosing a new ending every time the old one tries to repeat itself. And now, when the panic comes, I don't apologize for it. I don't minimize it. I listen. I soothe. I honor it. Because it's not weakness. It's memory. And I'm allowed to remember. I'm allowed to feel. I'm allowed to heal. Even from things that happened in quiet kitchens when no one was watching.
It doesn't matter how gently I say it, how many disclaimers I add, how many times I say, "I know you did your best," or "This isn't about blaming you." It always lands the same way. She hears one word: ungrateful. To her, my pain isn't evidence of something wrong, it's an insult an accusation, a betrayal of the image she's worked so hard to protect, the image of the good mother, the selfless mother, the one who gave me everything. And maybe, in some ways, she did. She cooked dinner. She packed school lunches. She showed up to parent-teacher nights and bought me birthday gifts and took family photos at the holidays. But she also ignored my feelings, dismissed my voice, used guilt as a leash, and made love feel like a transaction I had to earn. Those things exist too. But when I bring them up, when I try to speak even a fraction of my truth, she narrows her eyes and says, "You're so ungrateful." Like that word is a shield, a weapon, a punishment. And it works. For years, it shut me down. Because I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be ungrateful. I didn't want to be the bad daughter. So I minimized everything. I watered down my pain. I made her feel like the hero, even when I felt like the casualty. I said thank you when I wanted to say, "You hurt me." I smiled in photos I didn't feel safe in. I wrote happy captions for memories that left bruises on my heart because I thought that was love. Because I was taught that if someone puts a roof over your head, you're not allowed to talk about how cold it felt inside. But now I know better. Gratitude and grief can coexist. Appreciation and acknowledgement are not enemies. I can be thankful for the ways she showed up and still be wounded by the ways she didn't. I can hold both truths in my hands without letting one cancel out the other. I can say, yes, you provided. And also, no, that wasn't enough. Not because I'm spoiled, not because I'm bitter, but because I'm finally telling the truth. And the truth is this: surviving is not the same as being loved well. But she doesn't hear that. She only hears what she's been conditioned to hear, that I'm ungrateful, selfish, dramatic. She brings up the money she spent, the things she sacrificed, the ways she was better than her own mother, as if that's the bar, as if not being as bad as is something to hang your pride on. And when I don't give her the response she wants, when I don't melt into apology or praise, she retreats into her role, the wounded matriarch, the misunderstood giver, the victim of her ungrateful child. It's a play I've seen 1,000 times. And for most of my life, I knew my lines. I played the part. The good daughter, the peacekeeper, the one who says, "You're right, Mom. I didn't mean it like that. I'm sorry." Just to keep the peace. Just to avoid the guilt. But peace that costs your voice is not peace. It's performance. It's quiet resentment wearing a smile. And I'm tired of performing. There's a loneliness that comes when you stop playing the role others expect from you. A grief. Because in walking away from who they want you to be, you realize how little they ever tried to see who you really are. And that's what I feel now. Not rage, not hatred, just this hollow ache where connection was supposed to live. Because when she calls me ungrateful, what she's really saying is, your truth threatens me, and I care more about protecting my version of things than I do about understanding yours. I used to think healing meant reconciliation, that one day we'd sit down, talk it through, cry, and walk away better. But I've learned that healing sometimes means letting go of the need to be seen by people who've already made up their mind about you. It means giving yourself the apology they won't offer. It means no longer explaining your pain to someone who insists you should feel lucky instead. So no,
I'm not ungrateful. I'm just finally honest. I'm allowed to say, I deserved emotional safety, not just physical shelter. I needed to be heard, not just fed. I wanted love that didn't come with strings attached. And if she can't hear that without making it about her, then that's her journey, not mine. There's no trophy for being the daughter who never spoke up. There's no reward for sacrificing your truth at the altar of someone else's comfort. So I'll take the labels. Dramatic, ungrateful, too much. If those are the names they give people who finally tell the truth, then fine. I'll carry them proudly. Because the only thing worse than being called ungrateful is living a life where your pain never had a name. And I've done enough of that.
For most of my life, I protected her. Not just from the world, but from the truth, from the impact of her actions, from the reflection of herself in my pain. I edited my words to avoid upsetting her. I filtered my memories so they'd sound softer. I carried the weight of her mistakes in silence because I didn't want to ruin the illusion. The illusion that we were close, the illusion that she was kind, the illusion that my childhood was good enough. But I'm not protecting that illusion anymore because every time I do, I abandon the little girl inside me who just wanted to feel safe. I think about her sometimes, that younger version of me, sitting at the top of the stairs, listening to the way her mother's voice could cut, watching how quickly love turned to withdrawal. She didn't have the words for it back then. She just knew that being herself wasn't always safe, that tears were punished, that boundaries were seen as disrespect, that silence was the only way to stay close. She learned to read the room before she even knew how to read a book. She learned how to keep the peace, how to smile on command, how to hide every inconvenient feeling deep inside her chest like a secret. And she did it well. So well, in fact, that even I forgot she was still in there, curled up and waiting for someone to tell her the truth. You didn't imagine it. It really was that hard. And you didn't deserve any of it. Breaking the illusion meant going back for her. Not with judgment, but with compassion. It meant listening to the memories I once brushed off. The ones I used to label not a big deal. The ones I minimized because I thought they didn't count. But they did count. The time I was punished for crying. The way my accomplishments were ignored unless they made her look good. The quiet manipulations disguised as love. They all left marks. Not bruises you can see, but ones that shaped how I see myself, how I move through the world, how I love and let myself be loved. One of the hardest parts of healing is realizing how many of your adult wounds are echoes of things you were taught to normalize as a child. The people-pleasing, the over-explaining, the anxiety around saying no, the shame that comes from setting boundaries, the deep, aching guilt when you finally speak your truth. That doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from growing up in an environment where love was conditional, where your worth was tied to your obedience, and where the truth was too dangerous to speak. So I had to unlearn the illusion, not for revenge, not to hurt her, but to rescue myself, to rescue the little girl who waited years to feel safe, who begged for softness in a house full of sharp edges, who thought love meant tiptoeing, and affection always had a price. She deserved better, and so do I.
Some days, I still feel guilty, like I'm betraying her by telling this truth. Like I should just move on, keep the family secrets tucked neatly away. But then I remember the illusion never protected me. It only protected her. It kept her comfortable. It kept her image intact. It kept me silent. And silence is not healing. Silence is a cage. And I'm done living in it. Now when I sit down to write, I imagine I'm writing to that younger version of me, the one who used to whisper her feelings into a pillow, the one who thought being good meant being invisible. And I say, I see you. I hear you. You were right. It wasn't okay. And it wasn't your fault. Those words are small, but they are sacred. They're the words I needed then, and I get to give them to myself now. There's a certain grief that comes with breaking the illusion. Because when you stop pretending, you also let go of the fantasy. The fantasy that one day she'll change, that one day she'll understand, that one day she'll sit you down and say, I was wrong. I'm sorry. I wish I had done better. And maybe she will one day, but maybe she won't. And I can't put my healing on hold, waiting for a version of her that may never exist. So I've started making peace with the truth. Not the polished, polite version, but the raw, honest one. The version that says, she tried in only the ways she knew how, but those ways hurt me, and I'm allowed to say that out loud. The version that doesn't erase her efforts, but also doesn't excuse her harm. The version that says I can love her from a distance without sacrificing my well-being to maintain closeness. The version that honors both my grief and my growth. Breaking the illusion is not about punishment. It's about freedom. It's about telling the truth so I can stop carrying what was never mine to hold. It's about choosing my inner child every time I'm faced with the decision to protect a lie or speak the truth. It's about saying, I will no longer pretend this was love just because it came wrapped in obligation and guilt. And it's about building a life where honesty is no longer a threat, but a beginning. There's a pain that doesn't show up in bruises, a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from violence or screaming. It comes quietly, when someone looks you in the eye and tells you your truth isn't real. That's what she did. Not in so many words, but in the way she dismissed my memories, minimized my hurt, and rewrote the story to protect herself. I told her what I felt. I said, that hurt me. And she said, you're exaggerating. I said, that moment stayed with me. She said, I don't remember that. You must be confused. I said, I needed you to be there for me. And she said, I did my best. What more do you want? Every time I reached for her with truth, she pulled away with denial. And that rejection of my reality cut deeper than anything she ever said or did before. Not being believed, it changes something in you. It makes you question your memory, your judgment, your worth. You start wondering, did I make it worse than it was? Was I just too sensitive? Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I'm the problem. That's the danger of gaslighting. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It convinces you to doubt your own heartbeat. It teaches you to rewrite your pain until it's small enough for someone else to accept. But healing doesn't happen in denial. It happens in truth. And truth needs to be believed. The hardest part wasn't just that she denied what she did. It was that she acted like my need to talk about it was the real betrayal, as if opening up about my pain was somehow worse than causing it. She saw my honesty as an attack, my clarity as cruelty, my boundaries as punishment. And so, instead of stepping into accountability, she stepped into victimhood. She said, "You're making me out to be a bad mother. You're trying to make me feel guilty. You always focus on the negative." And just like that, the conversation wasn't about my hurt anymore. It was about her discomfort. Again, that's what people like her do. They make you choose between being heard and being loved. And when you finally choose to be heard, they take back the love. It's not real love. It's conditional. It's performative. It's fragile, the kind that shatters the second you stop playing along. But for years, I didn't know that. I kept trying to explain, kept bringing evidence, kept hoping that if I found the right words, she'd finally say, "I see it now. I believe you. I'm sorry." But those words never came. So instead, I started saying them to myself. "I believe you. You're not crazy. That moment really happened. You weren't imagining it. You weren't too much. You were hurt, and it mattered." Those words saved me. Because when the people who were supposed to protect you end up being the ones who dismiss you, you have to learn how to protect yourself. Not with walls, but with truth. Not with silence, but with self-trust. There's a cost to not being believed. It's subtle. It lives in the way your voice shakes when you tell a story that hurt you. It lives in the way you hesitate before calling something abuse because no one ever validated your wounds. It lives in the way you over-explain, over-apologize, try to shrink your emotions into something more palatable. Because if your own mother didn't believe you, who else will? That's what it teaches you, that your pain is only real if someone else agrees it should be. But that's a lie. Your pain is real even if no one claps when you name it. Your story is valid even if the person who caused it refuses to hear it. Your healing is necessary even if it makes other people uncomfortable. And being believed, it starts with you. I no longer need her to believe me, not because it wouldn't help, it would, but because I won't let my healing depend on someone who's built their identity around pretending they've done nothing wrong. I don't need her validation to trust myself. I don't need her permission to grieve. I don't need her understanding to tell the truth. And that's what freedom feels like. The little girl in me waited a long time for someone to say, "I believe you." And now, every time I write, every time I speak, every time I honor what happened, I say it again. I believe you. I believe you. I believe you.
I thought forgiveness would feel like a softening, like a warm breeze after a long winter, like an exhale I'd been holding in for years. And in some ways, it did. But not in the way I expected. Not with closure. Not with an apology. Not with her finally seeing me. It came in spite of all that, because none of it ever happened. She never apologized. She never acknowledged what she did. She never sat down and asked, "What was it like for you growing up with me?" Instead, she chose silence. Smiles over substance. Holiday texts and surface-level conversations as if none of it ever happened. She wants to skip over the wreckage and pretend we're standing on something stable. She wants laughter, but not reflection. Closeness, but not truth. Forgiveness without accountability. But healing doesn't work like that. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's not pretending. and it's definitely not a reward for someone else's denial. I wanted to forgive her. Truly. Not because she asked for it, she never did, but because I didn't want to carry the weight of resentment anymore. I was tired of being angry, tired of looping through memories that felt like open wounds, tired of giving her that much space inside my head. So I tried. I journaled. I cried. I talked about it in therapy, again and again and again. And slowly, I stopped needing her to say the right thing. I stopped waiting for her to understand. I stopped hoping she'd meet me where I was. But just when I thought I was ready to open the door again, she acted like there had never even been a fire, like there had never been a wound, never a word spoken in pain, never a journal violated. And that hurt more than all the past combined, because it wasn't just denial, it was erasure. She erased the work I'd done, the nights I sat with my grief, the years I spent rebuilding my voice, the courage it took to name the harm out loud. All of it, flattened by her smile and a cheerful, "So when are you coming home for dinner?" That's the thing no one tells you about healing. Sometimes the biggest heartbreak comes after the hard part, after you've done the work, after you've let go of the rage, after you've made space for reconciliation, only to realize the other person has no intention of meeting you there. They don't want resolution, they want amnesia. They want to pick up where it was convenient for them, ignoring the wreckage they left behind. But I can't go back. Not to pretending, not to performing, not to calling it love when it never felt safe. I can forgive her. I have forgiven her, in the only way I know how. Not with reunions, not with forced smiles, but with release. Forgiveness for me has looked like this. No longer needing her to understand. No longer spending nights rewriting messages I'll never send. No longer trying to make her see a version of me she never wanted to know. It's looked like peace, but it's come with distance. And that's something I never expected. Because I used to believe that forgiveness meant reconciliation, that we'd hug, cry, start over. But forgiveness doesn't always lead to closeness. Sometimes it leads to clarity. And sometimes that clarity says, she cannot walk with you into the life you're building now. Because if she won't acknowledge the fire, she can't help you rebuild the house. She wants to move on, but not through it, around it. She wants the version of me who kept the peace, not the one who found her voice. She wants connection without accountability, trust without honesty, love without repair. And I can't do that anymore. Not because I hate her, but because I finally love me. Enough to protect my peace. Enough to guard the self I've worked so hard to rebuild. Enough to say, if you want me in your life, you have to accept the truth that comes with me. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give the other person. It's something you give yourself. But healing requires honesty, and honesty doesn't survive in silence. So yes, I forgive her, but I won't pretend. I won't shrink back into the version of myself that made her comfortable. If she wants to pretend nothing happened, that's her choice, but I won't play along, because the cost is too high, and I've already paid enough.
Dear Mom, I never planned to write this. Not really. Not like this. I think some part of me always held out hope that you'd say the words first, that you'd look at me one day and just understand without me having to explain, without me having to beg. But you didn't. And maybe you never will. So this letter isn't for you anymore. It's for me. For the version of me that waited too long for your love to feel like safety. For the little girl who kept trying to be good enough to be seen. For the grown woman who finally realized she was never the problem. There's so much I want to say. So many truths I buried beneath your comfort. So many moments I minimized because I didn't want you to feel bad, even as I was breaking. You see, you taught me how to hide, how to smile when I was hurting, how to be polite instead of honest, how to edit myself to make sure you were okay even when I wasn't. I learned early on that your love came with conditions, that it could be withdrawn like oxygen if I said the wrong thing, felt the wrong thing, was the wrong thing. So I made myself smaller, quieter, more agreeable. You praised me for it. You called it maturity. You told people how lucky you were to have a daughter who never caused trouble. But I wasn't mature. I was terrified. I was scared of making you upset, scared of your cold silences, scared that if I told the truth, you'd stop loving me. And the worst part is, you already had. At least the real me. You loved the version of me that didn't challenge you, that made you feel like a good mother, that smiled in photos and said, "Thank you," even when I was quietly crumbling. I know you're not a monster. I know you did what you could with what you had. I know you probably didn't even realize the damage you caused. But I'm allowed to say that what you gave was not enough. I needed more. I needed warmth, curiosity, accountability, a safe place to fall apart. Instead, I got eye rolls, dismissive sighs, silence, sarcasm, control dressed up as concern. And when I finally tried to tell the truth, when I opened a door I'd kept locked for decades, you didn't walk through it, you slammed it shut. You read my journal, the only place I ever felt safe enough to be honest, and then you denied it. Or worse, you blamed me for writing it down in the first place. You called me ungrateful, said I was exaggerating, said I was trying to hurt you. But I wasn't. I was trying to heal. I still am. There's a part of me that still wants your approval. Even now, even after everything. That part of me wonders what it would feel like to hear you say, "I'm sorry I made you feel invisible. I'm sorry I didn't listen better. I'm sorry I made you question your worth." But I'm done waiting. Because your silence speaks louder than any words ever could. You don't get to decide what happened. You don't get to rewrite my memories. You don't get to ask for forgiveness without offering honesty in return. I forgive you, but I also remember. And I will not betray myself by pretending anymore. If you ever do read this, I hope you know, this isn't about hate. It never was. It's about truth, about the cost of silence, about what happens to a daughter when her mother teaches her that feelings are threats and honesty is betrayal. It's about me learning finally that love should not come at the expense of my voice, that peace without truth is just performance. And I won't perform anymore. I'm healing now. Without you. Without your validation. Without the ending I once dreamed of. And that healing, it's sacred. It's mine. It's made of tears I cried alone, words I finally dared to speak, and boundaries I never knew I was allowed to set. You may never understand that, and that's okay. I'm not writing this for you to change. I'm writing it so I can keep going, so I can finally put the past down, so I can stop bleeding from wounds you pretend don't exist. Goodbye to the version of me that needed you to see her. Goodbye to the hope that you'll wake up one day and become someone different. Goodbye to the girl who kept begging for a love that came with strings. And hello to the version of me that tells the truth, even if her voice shakes, who feels everything without shame, who no longer calls it love when it hurts this much to hold. Goodbye, Mom. And if you ever read this, I hope you find the courage to tell the truth too, even if it's only to yourself. Sincerely, the daughter who finally let go.
I used to think healing had a finish line, like one day I'd wake up and it would all be behind me. No more triggers, no more shaky voice when I talked about my past, no more need to explain why something so small could still make me cry. But now I know healing doesn't work like that. It's not a moment, it's a process, a rhythm, a return. A choice you make again and again to show up for yourself, to sit with the discomfort, to choose truth over silence and compassion over shame. Some days I still ache, not always from new wounds, but from the old ones that resurface when I least expect it. A song, a smell, a phone call I let ring without answering, little things that stir something deep inside me, not because I haven't healed, but because I am healing, because healing doesn't erase the past. It teaches you how to live with it, how to hold the memory without letting it drown you, how to feel the pain without letting it define you. There are still parts of me that flinch, that tighten up when I speak my truth, as if I'm still waiting for someone to call me dramatic or ungrateful or too much. But those parts are healing too, and I've learned to be gentle with them. I don't shame them anymore. I don't rush them. I don't tell them to get over it. Instead, I say, I see you. You're allowed to be here. You're allowed to take your time. That's what healing sounds like now. Not a loud breakthrough, but a quiet kindness. A whisper that says, you're safe now. I've stopped needing everyone to understand, stopped needing closure in the way I used to define it, because some people will never admit what they did. Some relationships will never be repaired. Some endings won't come with apologies. And that's okay. I've made peace with the version of the story I won't get, and I've chosen to tell my own version anyway, the one that honors my pain without staying trapped in it. Because healing doesn't mean you forget what happened. It means you remember and choose to live anyway. I still cry sometimes, but the tears feel different now. They're not desperation. They're release. They're gratitude. They're a sign that I'm no longer numb. I cry because I can feel again, because I no longer have to armor up just to survive, because I no longer have to explain or justify or shrink. I cry because I'm proud of the girl who endured so much without ever being told she was allowed to break. And I cry because she made it. Through the silence, through the shame, through the long nights when she thought no one would ever hear her. I'm still healing, and that's okay. I've stopped measuring my progress by how normal I seem. I've started measuring it by how honest I can be, by how kind I am to myself on hard days, by how little I abandon myself just to keep the peace. I've learned that boundaries are not walls, they're doors. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is close a door and not reopen it.
I've learned that I don't need to be the daughter who fixes everything, that I don't need to set myself on fire to keep someone else warm, that it's okay to walk away from people who keep choosing the version of you that doesn't speak. I'm still healing, but I'm no longer waiting for anyone to save me. Not her, not the apology that never came, not the fantasy of the mother I hoped she'd become. I'm learning to be my own safe place now, to mother myself with patience, to listen when my body says, "Not this again," to leave when love comes dressed in guilt, to stay soft, even when the world tells me to harden. This isn't the ending I thought I wanted, but it's the one I needed. Not a perfect reunion, not a tidy bow on a messy history, just truth and peace, and a self that finally feels like home. To anyone listening, if your healing is still messy, still unfinished, still painful, you're not doing it wrong. It takes time, and it takes honesty, and it takes courage to stop pretending that what hurt you didn't happen. You're allowed to tell the truth. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to keep going, even if your voice shakes, even if no one claps, even if you're still figuring it all out. You are healing, and that is enough. I'm still healing, and for the first time in my life, I'm not ashamed of that.